Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Using Person-Centered Approaches in Transition Planning. This afternoon's presenter is Michael Steinbrook, Program Coordinator at the Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, the Elizabeth M. Boggs Center on Developmental Disabilities. Michael will provide an overview of person-centered planning along with information on where plan facilitation training can be found. Strategies to assist in gathering person-centered information specific to a student's interests and support needs will also be shared. This will include a discussion on how information can be used to impact transition goals in the IEP. While acknowledging the need for education around a specific topic, such as today's presentation, the Family Support Center of New Jersey also recognizes that families have specific questions around their child's transition years. The Transition Matters website assists families and professionals in identifying resources to successfully transition your child or student with special needs to adult life. Resources such as webinars, in-person workshops, and statewide and regional contact information are made available on the site. We encourage you to explore the site further and register for any upcoming sessions that may interest you. Before we begin, let's take a moment to go over how you can participate during today's web event. Everyone has their own control panel in the upper right corner of their screen that looks similar to the one here. Use the orange arrow to open or hide your control panel. To listen to the webinar, you have two audio options to choose from: mic and speakers, and telephone. If you can't hear well using your computer speakers, you can also elect to use your telephone to listen to today's session. In order to maintain the best sound quality possible, all but the presenters will be muted throughout the webinar. If you have questions or comments, you can submit them using the questions panel. All questions will be collected and answered at the end of the webinar as long as time allows. At this time, I would like to introduce this afternoon's presenter, who I'm lucky enough to be in the same room with, Mr. Michael Steinbrook. So Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Melanie. Good to be here. And I just push this button and show my screen, and we're good to go?
You're good.
All right, excellent. So, again, wonderful to be here. Thanks for joining us. We're going to spend, looks like we got about 55 minutes, including any questions you all might have to talk about person-centered approaches in schools and using those approaches specifically in transition planning. I'm going to go over some materials. I'll go over a good bit of material. I'm going to use some video. Hopefully that'll work out okay. And overall, I'm going to just talk about an overview of the project I'm working on, which is person-centered approaches in schools in transition, which we call PCAST for short. I'm going to talk a little bit about person-centered thinking and person-centered planning, a bit about its history, and I'm going to show you some examples of what schools are doing in the project and how we hope information will be used and should be used that's gathered working collaboratively with families and students. Excuse me. So, first of all, I just wanted to say that the project that I'm working on is funded by New Jersey Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. It's funded through IDEA, and it's actually pretty exciting for me. I don't know of any state-funded projects that really are looking at person-centered approaches the way our Department of Ed is, currently. I'm going to talk a little bit about the details of what I'm doing, but I'm working statewide in a number of different school districts on, training and demonstrating person-centered approaches and working collaboratively with those school districts on how they can be best implemented in the places where, where I'm working. Overall, it's really about an exploration about the use of person-centered approaches. I don't come into districts in a prescriptive way with a program. What I do is really demonstrate these approaches, methods, techniques, skills, tools, things that have been developed over many years by people much smarter than me, mostly people with disabilities and families who really work collaboratively with other professionals to kind of develop this body of work that we can then share here in New Jersey and learn more from students and families and educators on how to improve those approaches. So it's really a collaborative project, and I'll talk more about that. But ultimately, the ultimate outcome we're looking for is to help students achieve person-centered post-school outcomes that they themselves really identify through person-centered planning. Just wanted to mention that this workshop and the materials that we use, are concepts that have been developed over time through the Learning Community for Person-Centered Practices, of which I've been a board member for about 10 years, I suppose, and have been serving as vice chair for quite a while. That's an international volunteer community of practice, meaning there's people internationally who are kind of working to use person-centered approaches in many different ways, and they share learning with each other, and we are able to use that information and with the obligation to really share the things that we learned in New Jersey back with that group. Also, my history with person-centered planning, started with people like Jack Pierpoint and Marcia Forrest quite a long time ago in the earlier 90s, and also and John O'Brien and Beth Mount. These are all people who started this early work, really going back even to the mid-'80s. And so a lot of the things we're doing are not necessarily new, but we have found much better ways to implement them and to plan with people and to find ways to bring person-centered approaches into systems, which is not an easy fit, as you all probably know. So I'm just going to go real quickly over the types of things I do with schools, which basically involves me helping them design site-specific project planning events, to deliver training and technical assistance, meaning support on person-centered thinking and person-centered approaches, to provide assistance in developing on-site, site-specific resources. If schools want to develop a tool or a process, I'll work directly with them to help support them to do that. I'll provide, one of the most critical things is providing demonstration of person-centered planning in schools. So I don't, today we're only going to spend an hour talking about this, which is not a lot of time, but even if I had a day or 2 days, to train a district, what we found is that what we really need is for that support to be with a school over time. So I'll work in the project with the school over the period of years, in and out, to demonstrate approaches, to work with them, to kind of work through the barriers, to work collaboratively with families, to find ways to implement person-centered approaches in the processes and things that schools are already doing. We're not trying to create a parallel planning process to the IEP. I think the ultimate goal would be to find ways to make the pre-IEP planning and the IEP process more person-centered, and that's what some schools have been actively doing, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So I can also build capacity in schools by providing observation and feedback to educators who are going to use these techniques and actually facilitate person-centered planning, assist them in finding places in the school or processes or different things where they may want to implement person-centered planning, help them identify barriers, and also show them that this isn't just about planning with students, it's also about problem-solving methods that they can use in other ways that can really help the school and help with relationships with families. And lastly, I provide resources to schools on an ongoing basis. So when what I say to schools is, and this slide illustrates is, what I like most about change is that it's a synonym for hope. If you're taking a risk, what you're really saying is, I believe in tomorrow and I will be a part of it. This project, when I come to schools, is really voluntary. There's nothing mandated. So school districts that get involved are saying they want to do this, they want to be involved, and with all the things that are happening today that are mandated, I had real concerns starting this project about whether schools would really, be able to kind of muster the time or energy to do it. But every place I've been, although it's different, pace of change, where we're working, every school is enthusiastic, families are enthusiastic, and students have really responded to what we're doing. So the project outcomes that we're looking to, as I said, help students achieve person-centered post-school outcomes, which really means help them vision, create a vision for their future and decide, what is it I want to see happen in my life, and regardless of how significant their disability or how they communicate, really in a collaborative way help a student articulate that vision and achieve those outcomes. So we want to see increased student participation in pre-IEP planning and meetings, increased family member participation and collaboration, improve self-determination skills, develop more effective support strategies for students in schools using person-centered approaches to really discover what might work best, make better informed decisions on educational placement, and as I said before, improve skills of facilitators, increase person-centered IEP goals, and one of the things that we really are focusing on also, which I'm sure many families can relate to, and most of the people on the call are family members, although we probably have about 20% professionals on the call, is that knowledge of the adult service system is hard to come by, and it's hard to come by in a way that's really understandable and digestible, and it tends to be, the closer you get to transitioning to adult life, the more stressful and difficult it is to kind of get your head around some of these things. So a lot of different agencies and advocacy groups are attempting to provide better information to families. What I can do over time is spend time with schools to really help them sort of navigate all that information and become a little more knowledgeable so that they can support families better. And so lastly, when students do participate in person-centered planning and they have that kind of information gathered, when they do transition to adult life, if they're going to be connected to adult services, say through DDD or DVRS, Division on Developmental Disabilities, or Division on Vocational Rehabilitation Services, that information comes with them, and that helps expedite better services and supports.
Michael, we actually have a couple of questions already.
Sure.
I think might fit in well here.
Yeah, great.
We have someone that wants to know if you work with private special education schools within New Jersey.
So I work with, the schools that I work with are decided in collaboration with the Department of Education. So any school can express interest. I'll explain a couple of things about the work that I'm doing, part of which is the long-term relationship with schools that I have, but I also do some shorter-term technical assistance with schools, which may mean coming in and doing a training or professional development training, shorter training, or doing actual facilitation of a person-centered plan with a student and family for the purposes of, first and foremost, helping that student plan for their future and the family, but also giving an opportunity for that school district to really see and feel what person-centered planning is and what it looks like, and what the kind of feel the value more than what any training can really get you. I do my best in training, and I do have training that's available statewide that's open to anyone, regardless of whether it's a public or private school. So there's nothing absolutely precluding that participation. It just depends on what the Department of Ed agrees to with us, and what the nature of that support might be.
Perfect. So I'm going
got another one?
I do. I have one more, and I'm going to let you move on with your presentation. Do you collaborate with the Center for Independent Living?
I do not directly, but I know a number of schools that I work with do participate in the in the support that the SILs provide. So it's not directly connected to the SILs. Okay, so this next slide is basically just want to let you all know this is the PCAST project. Part of what I do is to build a community of practice. So I can I'm a one-man show right now in terms of my work on this project. Hopefully we're going to have some more people on it in the future. But for me to run around like Johnny Appleseed, kind of bringing these things to schools, I want to be able to do that, and I do that, as much as I possibly can. But what I also want to do is connect schools and connect families and connect organizations so that we can really develop a vibrant community of practice in New Jersey around person-centered approaches. It's one of the nice things that I've seen is that I've been able to connect schools so that they're calling each other, visiting each other. Families are talking to each other. Families are talking to schools differently about what they value and what they'd like to see happen. So we have some face-to-face opportunities that happen during the year, which are open to anyone. We also have a listserv where I disseminate information, including information about training that you can access. And if you're interested in joining that listserv, and it's not the kind of listserv that's going to put a lot of email in your inbox. It's really a dissemination listserv, so it's about me getting information about the project and related topics to person-centered approaches and transition, adult services, that type of thing. So I'm very judicious about how often I send an email. But if you want to contact Pamela Alexander here at our office, and her name is on the screen there, pamela.alexander@rutgers.edu. She'd be happy to sign you up for that. And I'll just leave that for a hot second. All right. And I'm going to keep going because I'm conscious of time. So essentially, we are a collaboration. So what I've really tried to do, and I'm going to talk about what these values are, but really take the principles and values of person-centeredness and person-centered practice and apply them at the project level. So, and I'm going to hopefully be able to get my friend Melanie here to talk about some of her experience, because I was actually able to plan with her and her son and her family earlier in the year or last year. But it's really about a collaboration, a true collaboration with students, people with disabilities, families, and educators in the project to really discover, how we can apply person-centered approaches. So the proverb is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So really, it means that, I'm not just bopping in and out of schools, but really trying to develop relationships and try and find ways to make lasting change in those places. All right, and so those values I talked about, focus on student and families, really focus on being outcomes driven, meaning planning doesn't mean anything if it's not connected if it doesn't, isn't reflected in the services and supports that are provided. So we really want to make sure that, we're not just writing plans and developing plans for the sake of developing plans, but making sure the services and supports that are being delivered are directly aligned to what we're learning about individual students. So we work together collaboratively. I treat each school as unique, and I try very hard not to carry any assumptions into a project at a school about what I think is right or what I think should happen, and I ask the schools to do the same thing, and we have to really discipline ourselves to do that, which is to say that you don't know what will or will not work in a given place or how best to go about it. So what we really try to do is say, let's demonstrate, let's do some planning, and let's see what we value in those experiences, and then let's plan together and design a specific project in this place where your strengths and your needs, where you can say, this is how we'd like to apply person-centered approaches in whatever way makes sense there and whatever pace makes sense in that place. And I go into those schools not to evaluate them, not to say whether this is a good program or a bad program or this or that, but again, really not to make, let that get in the way. Just I observe things, I attend IEPs, really just to become part of that place and to help the people in that organization and the families and students that are connected to it to really think about how to move forward. All right, so person-centered planning. Let's talk about what it really is, and I'm going to show you a little video so you don't have to listen to me talk anymore for a minute. But person-centered thinking and planning is a strength-based process that applies to all people. It's one which truly values and searches for and explores every person's gift and capacity. I think that the fundamental thing walking into this is to understand that to be person-centered is to have a fundamental belief that each person comes to you whole and complete and of value, and that there are gifts there that, with the support and intention to discover them, can be places can be found where those gifts can be welcomed in the students' community. So that's really fundamentally what it is about, and it supports each person, to find those opportunities and share those gifts, and really design supports around that. It happens in the context of what's important to the person and their vision for the future. So really planning takes you through a discovery process to an articulation of the vision that student has for themselves with the support of the people that know and care about them most, and then backs into, okay, so what do we need to do to get there? And I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. Person-centered thinking and planning are used worldwide in every kind of sphere you can imagine, and spreading every day to more countries and more applications, whether it be healthcare or mental health or corrections or aging or end of life, any number of things. And I have, through the community practice that I talked about, called the learning community, there are people that I'm connected with, worldwide that are involved in that work. So it's pretty exciting. It includes not just formal planning, not just planning events, but also the thinking that underlies that planning, which means that planning is important, and capturing information and holding people accountable to that information is important. But what's most important is that the people that touch a student's life every day really have a fundamental understanding of person-centered thinking, and really it becomes part of their everyday to think in person-centered ways, to use the skills and tools that we teach and we practice really unconsciously, and in terms of how they think about problem solving and supporting students. It's a very accessible and collaborative process. As I said, it incorporates facilitation methods to really discover deeply who a person is, and really have that drive what the supports and services are. In aggregate, when you're planning with students in this way, inevitably it affects organizational culture and impacts, enables, leaders to make better decisions on an organizational level, and ultimately change the way systems think. So that's what we hope. It's hard, that's definitely very hard work. Some people think it's impossible, but it's, I'm committed to that work, as are many of my colleagues. So it also involves facilitated problem-solving tools and supporting effective team building methods. So it's not just about the students, it's also about the professionals. I want to show you a quick video just for a couple minutes from a great, it was one of the people who really did a lot of the early work around person-centered planning and person-centered approaches, Beth Mount, who's located in New York. So this video she is talking about the difference between person-centered and system-centered, and how to figure out how to reconcile the two. So hopefully this will play in a way you can hear. And I have to make sure my volume is on, right?
From the origin of person-centered planning, we were trying to understand and see what it looks like when we just fit people into systems and defined their needs and saw them through the eyes of what a system needs for a person to be in order to generate the funding that's required and to basically service them. And system-centered work tends to be based on a medical model, which assumes something's wrong with people, and it's the system's job to fix them. And so the system is invested in defining them in terms of their deficiencies and creating a treatment plan, and then working to help people get it right before they get to be members and be whole people in the real world. So person-centered planning offers a major contrast to that, which is to say that people don't belong to systems. They belong to themselves, they belong to their families and their communities. And if we see them in a different light by the capacities that they bring, and we understand that their communities are the place where they can contribute and be citizens. Then our thinking shifts dramatically from how to fit people into systems and service them there to how do we support people to live good lives in community, and then how do we take what we need from systems and services so that services are not bad, they just tend to be wired for their own purposes, for their own self-interest. So a good person-centered planning process calls into question the way we use services and invites us to really change the way most of our services are configured to be more responsive to the people and the way that they want to live in the communities that they're in.
Okay. So let me just pull this back up again. Where are we here? All right. So I want to give you a sense of, kind of what this is now. Give you a visual, give you all a visual, and I'll play a little clip of me facilitating some planning as well. But essentially, we take great care to create an environment where you can have full participation and collaboration. And what we've found really universally, talking to parents and educators agree is, how we meet and how we plan with families does not tend to make for an environment where people feel comfortable, or as comfortable as we need them to be in order to fully participate and fully collaborate. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So even in this picture that you're seeing, this is a special education teacher at a district in New Jersey who's planning with a student who's invited, a friend, and has family members and other members of the team there who participate in a collaborative planning meeting. So, and what we try to learn in those meetings, and the key questions we try to answer are, what are the gifts of the person? What, starting with what do people really like and admire about the person, but it goes deeper into skills and passions and things that are really going to start to paint a picture so that when we get to the vision for the future, when we get to really the action planning in terms of, okay, so what are we going to work on and focus on in the years that this student has left in the school system, really aligns with who they are as best as we can. We want to discover deeply what is most important to the person. And these aren't questions that we ask directly, but I'll talk about how we have facilitated conversations that lead us to discovering these questions. What do we need to know? What do supporters need to know and do to best support the person? And that's individualized by person. So we want to be able to deeply understand that, capture it, be able to share it, so that any student doesn't have to kind of retrain an aide or retrain a teacher in terms of what works best every year, but have a more fluid way of sharing information and capturing that information, really thinking about how each person communicates, in ways, whether they use words to communicate or not, how they communicate different feelings and emotions and things like that, but what we're seeing in them and how do we best support them if they are in times of stress or anxiety or sadness or anger, those types of things. Discovering what the characteristics are of people who support the person best so that we can match people up, or at least have people understand what will work better in terms of how we're supporting them. We need to create a vision that the person has for their future, understand more about really holistically what the person's current reality looks like, not just in class and not just about academic performance or functional performance, but really broadly who they are and in school and out of school, and really giving us an understanding to work from to help that student move to the future they want. So essentially all planning answers two things: what do we need to change, and what needs to stay the same or be enhanced. So then what we kind of back into, what are the what are the strengths that we need to build on and really focus on, and what are the things that are getting in the way of the vision that the person has put out in front of themselves, so that really you start to plan and build supports and services in the context where the student is going and what opportunities might be there on the other side, when they arrive as adults in adult life, and then what, kind of what person-centered goals do we want to see in the IEP, and what information do we really want to see in the IEP and driving the IEP. So this gives you, I'll give you a sense of, how a container that we can put information in. This isn't the only way to store person-centered information, but you'll see our friend Laura here, who we have permission to share, this information, which is really kind of capturing information in a way that people can actually read it. So if you can think of a teacher, instructional assistant, whoever, and it could be any student with any disability or label or no label for that matter. It's not, this isn't about disability or even, education. This is about people. But in this case, you can see the great things about Laura. Things, we bullet that information, we theme it, we put it in order of importance to her, we capture what's most important to Laura. In this case, really some key things around belonging and how she wants and needs to learn. How other people need to support her so that she feels confident, and how she can handle change. Tips about how she communicates, and you don't need to see the specifics here, but also then really focusing on the future about, what employment might look like, given all the things we learned about in the conversations that we had previously, what does that look like, and what relationships and home, and all the major conversations we're going to have, that then we can say, okay, so what's in the way, or what do we need to build on, and that becomes our recommendations for action. Now, ultimately, this kind of process, and we're seeing this in schools, is going to start merging with how people are running their IEP meetings. So that's, this is what I'm showing you, is kind of more of a separate person-centered planning process. But what we're learning is how to bring that process into the IEP so that all the requirements of the IEP are met, but we're making that process more collaborative and make it work better for students, families, and educators. So I want to show you a quick video just to give you kind of more of a visual sense of what that looks like, and then I'm going to have to keep moving pretty quick because we don't have a ton of time.
So what are the what's the other things that make up a really good day?
So it's not really important what's being said here, but this is the nature and flavor of what's happening.
What's great about OJ is that even if he's expecting someone to be there, as long as you explain, oh, so-and-so's out today, and then this person's in, he's really good, but it's important to him to know he really looks for certain people. There's very particular people that he looks for, that he knows he works with, that he knows he can goof off a little bit with and be a little silly. And being a little silly is important to him as well.
And if we dig into that a little bit, if we kind of put ourselves forward and say, someday OJ's working at a job, there's important information there, when there's new faces and new people, or how to know that, even OJ, I wanted to tell you something that.
So I'm gonna stop there. So just for time's sake, but I will kind of let me go forward a little bit here because I want you to see.
So
being around familiar staff.
So you see, I'm facilitating.
Familiar.
People are in a semicircle. I'm capturing information so that everyone. I'm going to kill the audio. So everyone sees that they're heard. It's not any one person with the laptop or with the pad taking notes. This is a collaborative process where we really do some deep exploration of kind of who the person is and the vision they have for themselves. You have a question, or
No.
You're good? Okay. So actually, Melanie, you can if you want to chime in at all, because
Sure.
you've experienced that process.
So I have. The one thing I would share is that it's in the first meeting that when Michael facilitated the person-centered planning session, it really allowed my son's voice to be heard for the first time. One of the most powerful statements that was made during that session was that we often think of how do we fix this person, right? It's really easy to look at someone's deficits, and the person-centered planning facilitated meeting really allows you to recognize someone's capacities, someone's interests, and not focus on their deficits for once. It was really a way to plan, I think, with my son around those strengths and interests, not only for today, but for his future, and allowed everyone to hear my son's vision, talking about my son's employment vision. And when you ask my son Logan what he wants to do for his future, it's been the same for years. He would always share with us that he wants to be a bartender, he wants to be a fireman. Those are his two go-to jobs, and he wants to work at an ice cream store. So I have to say, I think all sound like really fun jobs. But when we look at why does he want to do those, why is he interested in those fields? And he's a very social person. And to see the social interaction that he has experienced within those environments, not necessarily the bar, but knowing that a bar is a very social atmosphere, it allows us to see, to have a better vision of what Logan's planning for his future. And it's something I don't think that is done so naturally, people with students within the special education system, but I think that it's a great process to have that happen.
Right. So it's, this is not, again, it's not what our system has sort of designed in terms of how we think and how we plan with people. And, I don't, want to paint with too broad a brush. I don't, as I said, I don't evaluate or judge the places that I'm at. I just demonstrate, person-centered approaches and lead the schools, educators, families, and down a path where they discover, what is the value and kind of can look differently about what they've done in the past. As we, I've heard, as Melanie said, I've heard, a lot from people about whether, before I plan with them, about whether a student will attend or participate or will leave early, that kind of thing. And really, I don't have any example of a student leaving a planning meeting, which, in this case, what I demonstrate can be 90 minutes to 2 hours, much less, an IEP meeting, which oftentimes is less time than that. But I also hear about, not talking about some of the more difficult conversations, but when done in a positive, context, when we've really expressed the things that we really like and admire and appreciate, the things that we value about the student, and really help them articulate their vision for the future, you can then back into some of the conversations about things that are getting in the way, because what we're doing is we're helping them see some of the things that we think are important for them to work on in the context of what is important to them. And that's one of the big core concepts of person-centered approaches. So, and we do that in, using facilitated conversations. And so what that means is that I don't just ask people what's important to you, or ask their family what's important to your son or daughter, but really have different conversations different conversations about, what is a really great day, or what is a really hard day, or what are your, greatest hopes or fears, or different ways to have conversations that I know how to dig deeper into as a facilitator to discover that information. Typically in those meetings, as I said, you have a different setup. You saw in the example I gave you the semicircular kind of format with me facilitating. Everything we do in those sessions is intentional. Now, whether or not schools are going to maintain that or not, I can't tell you, but I can tell you I demonstrate things, the best way I can, so that when schools make decisions about what they take on or what they don't, they're going to know, they're going to make an informed decision, and they're going to know the cost of the things that they don't do. Sitting around a rectangular conference room table, there are power positions there, right? And there are people, everyone there is an expert in my view, but they don't always say, what they think, or have an opportunity to say what they think. So, this slide sort of says, you have people there, that in typical meetings that do, most of the talking, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have most of the information, or it doesn't mean that the other people don't have information. And one of there's research that show, there's a piece of research from 2006 that really measured, who does the talking in IEP meetings. And, in this particular study, it was, I think, 75% of the talking was done by education professionals, whether we're general educators, special educators, administrators, support staff. 5% was kind of multiple conversations going on. 15% was family members. Only 3% were the student, and then there's about 2% that was silence. So that's Eric Carter, who did a lecture for us just recently. He's down in Tennessee, but it was he reminded me of this research study that really shows that, how collaborative is that? How can we create an environment where more information is shared, but shared in a way where people are really comfortable doing it? So I'm going to skip some of these slides for time's sake because we have about 15 minutes, a little more.
Good. I think if we're asking questions throughout the session, if you're comfortable
with
that, go into
so I can keep going? All right, great. So, but one of the things I wanted to show you all is that this discovery process is about going deeper, digging deeper, asking questions behind the question, and capturing that information. And that's my job as facilitator. And then ultimately, you take that plan, like you saw with Laura, and use that information. And it's fluid. Make sure it's correct. Test it out. Change it as you need to. Make sure people are aware and are sharing that information. I'll give you some examples of some of those facilitated conversations. Just understanding who is in the person's life, family members, friends, people at home or people at school. Who are the people who are emotionally close to the person? If the person were in the center of this diagram, this is a very old kind of person-centered planning tool. Who are the people closest to this person? What do they have in common? What are the characteristics? What do they like to do together? It's not just about knowing who's in the person's life, but figuring out what it tells us. Knowing what people like and admire about the person, really discovering gifts and capacities. Howard Gardner said it's not how smart you are, it's how you are smart. And fundamentally, I believe that people from the most significantly disabled people to you, me, or anybody else, we all have ways that we are smart. And he wrote about multiple intelligences, and I know that every student I plan with, that's my job to help kind of help that student discover their own gifts, help them be recognized for those gifts, and find opportunities for them to share those gifts in their communities. This is a picture of something I do with my kids, every holiday season, is really just kind of put up our own little flip charts in our house and have us share what we really appreciate about each other. In the schools we get into a lot more things that help us for future planning with skills and passions and things like that. But I think that I put this slide in to remind me that the actual planning event, the actual discrete event of a student really hearing these things from the people that are closest to them can really have a profound impact. And I do hear that from families quite often, that even coming out of a meeting, that there's a change in the student themselves in terms of their appreciation and their desire to really pursue the things that they're interested in, and be valued and have valued roles. So just getting back to the meeting piece, I'm just going to say this one bit about it, which is that when people walk into a meeting, and there's reports and jargon and computers and conference room tables and people on this side and people on that side, it can create an immense amount of stress and pressure. And if you're starting hearing about deficits, that immediately triggers something in the brains of people present, and in particular the families and the student, which releases a stress hormone, cortisol, which makes people more conflict averse, and show protection behaviors, be more reactive and sensitive. So it's not the parents' fault; it's the environment that we create. And we take great pains. I'll use music. I'll have food present. We're semicircular. I, as a facilitator, have to create an environment like a good waiter in a busy restaurant, right? Have to create an environment of calm, of collaboration, using humor. So lots of things I train on to help people create an environment where instead of cortisol being released, oxytocin is released. That's your feel-good hormone. And the things that elevate in terms of your ability in your brain, things like communication, collaboration, trusting others, that's the stuff that we need to have happen, to have families and students and educators working together to create a shared vision of the future and work toward it. Here's some oxytocin-producing behaviors: concern for others, truthfulness about what's on your mind, stimulating discussion, painting a picture of mutual success, open to difficult conversations. On the other hand, cortisol-producing behaviors: don't trust others' intentions, focusing on convincing others, others are not understanding, pretending to be listening, emotions distract from listening. Think about all these meetings where this impacts not just family members or students, but also educators. So we have to really think differently about how we get together and how we think about students and talk to students and move toward the future. Just kind of bounce forward a little bit. I talked about some of these concepts. And how much time we have? About 10 minutes?
Got about 10 minutes. And just to remind everyone, this session will be recorded. So if you want to reference the recording, the archived version of this webinar, it will be available in about a week.
Okay.
Michael,
Yep,
can I ask a couple of quick questions?
Sure.
So we have someone that wants to know, when determining what the person themselves wish for their future, what if the person is unable to communicate well or at all?
Sure. And that's a great question, and it's one which happens we get all the time. And the thing that I remind people is that, a lot of this early work with person-centered planning and person-centered thinking happened because people developed ways explicitly for people who don't communicate with words or don't communicate at all. It means that it's even more, although this is important for everyone on this call, myself, Melanie, anybody, to really, person-centeredness is important for all of us. But if a person can't communicate with words, then bringing the people together who are closest to that person and having someone objectively facilitate planning so that they can really articulate that vision through those proxies, through those other people, and have it done in a way where no one co-opts their voice, right? That no one can distort their voice because we have these people coming together. That's what's critically important for those folks. But it's important for all of us, and so different schools may prioritize person-centered planning for this group of students or this group of students, and there's even a school who's doing this with all their students. But it's really about everyone. And the other thing is that you have students that a question I get a lot is, you have a student who has a dream to be a veterinarian or psychiatrist or a movie star or whatever, and again, most of you hopefully have learned this and understand this, is that in the past we used to kind of try and get them to stop saying that, or sweep it under the rug because we didn't know what to do with it. But in person-centered planning, we know that everyone's defined by their dreams, and to do that is really to crush them a little bit, and we really need to have them, help them explore, what they're talking about, help look for the underlying drivers for that dream, and also have them expand their dream to look at their other gifts and have them have a full array of what might be possible. So we have ways to kind of facilitate that process, and a lot of professionals aren't confident and competent yet in ways to do that. So that's what we try to do as part of our formal kind of planning process. So best possible future, I talked about that. When we get to that point in the conversation, what are the key conversations that you have? Yes, it differs by age. When you get to transition years, get closer to adult life, there's certain conversations you're going to have. We really want to talk about, make sure that the student is driving that conversation, but choice and decision-making, problem-solving, employment, vocation or meaningful day, home and housing, community living, what's life going to look like, how are they going to participate, what do we want to have in place for them, transportation, relationships. A lot of times it's figuring out how do we, a student has relationships in school, but are they going to still have those connections when they graduate? How do we maintain them, and how do we equip people to build new relationships? And so it's really about figuring out where this person is in all of that, and and what do we need to do to really prioritize for the future that they envision for themselves and the opportunities that they're going to have. So working out of that vision, it's about thinking about, okay, so what do we need to build on? What are the strengths and gifts here that we really want to help this person kind of hone? And because it's really any of us, it's our gifts that put us where we are. It's our gifts that put you in the work that you do or made you successful at the same things that you're successful for. But we also want to be mindful of the things that get in the way. And if it's hygiene, if it's communication, if it's choice and decision making, if it's whatever it is, we try as best we can to help the student and family and educators see that this is the vision, this is going to be in the way, so this is what we're going to be focusing on. So all the testing and evaluation that happens already in education is still critically important, but like everything, it's only important in the context of the whole person and the vision they have for themselves. And we've seen in these planning meetings where teachers have done a total turnaround in terms of what they're teaching and how they're teaching it based on what they learned from a family member. And so that's when when you can have that kind of environment where people are open to that, or when it comes to community-based instruction or looking for opportunities for sampling jobs or things that a student might have, schools that are open to the idea that a parent might have an idea or a connection, or we might discover something different that isn't on the current menu, right? So person-centered approaches, we have to, in schools you're going to have to reckon with budgets and staffing and all these other things, but you don't want that to drive your decision making. You want to back into those issues and help students get the life that they're looking for. Finally, a plan is not an outcome. I may be jumping ahead here on this slide, but basically, we have to action plan. So this is very outcomes driven. We want to make sure that the information that we're learning drives planning, that it becomes part of the IEP, that it's impacting goals in the IEP, it's impacting what supports are happening with the student, and ultimately we want it to impact the student's level of success with their post-school outcomes. So give you another view of the more formal planning. Now the thing I want to show you, though, is that, okay, how are schools implementing these things? Just in a nutshell, we have 5 more minutes. I'm going to end here with some examples. We have schools that have kind of used these processes and said, yeah, no, we can't do 90-minute meetings or 2-hour meetings with every student, obviously. They have hard enough time with their IEP. But we're going to have to think differently about, how we're meeting, and they may want to find ways to have the capacity to have those types of meetings with certain students for certain reasons. And every school I've been at has said, yeah, we want to have the capacity to do this. We recognize the value and the need to do this. I've yet to see a school that says, now our IEPs are fine, we don't need to do that. So, that's the hopeful message, is that educators really do, for the most part, want to embrace this and find ways to do it in the time that they have. But time is always the enemy. So, yes, schools want to have kind of facilitated group planning, as I've described. There's different ways to do that planning that I demonstrate. I've had teachers teach me how to use some of the things that I've demonstrated and bring them into the classroom to have more group activities where students are working on some of these discovery questions and really doing that self-exploration in the classroom, sometimes using graphics or images to really help them articulate that, to stand up in front of class, to talk about them and answer questions and have more focus than they had before. So we had some real promising results, with that, with students kind of doing that in the classroom. Here's just some pictures and images of that. Here's me with 6th graders, so it's not about just transition years, but 6th graders talking about their future. This is a school in New Brunswick. Talking about students talking about what they appreciate about each other. So it's about learning, different social skills, about learning self-determination skills. All these things are a part of, this project. Also about, using person-centered approaches to help students lead their own IEPs. I had a video of my friend Tani here, who is not somebody who's inclined to lead a meeting, and they weren't even sure she would come. She brought her person-centered information from a meeting she had and brought it into the IEP, just for the sake of us exploring, okay, so how can we use this information to drive the IEP? And she really took the bull by the horns and really started sharing that information and then asking questions. Okay, so this is what I think, what do you think? And and you have to remember that we don't do this a lot. Students don't have a lot of opportunity to do that. So we've had I know there's educators on the line have amended their PLAAFPs or PLEPs, so that's some changing documentation that they have. That's part of the IEP process. We've had schools change their websites to share more adult services and more information about person-centered planning, so family members are more informed. We've had we're linking person-centered approaches and the self-exploration, linking it to career exploration, so that when students are using different career exploration tools or activities, that they really have a better understanding of who they are as they do that, and it's not on just some loose kind of idea that I want to be this or I want to be that, but really understanding it. I talked about a school doing this school-wide. They use peer leaders, upperclassmen, to talk to 8th graders coming into the high school, using person-centered conversations. Intervention and referral services for when students, general ed program, when students are in trouble and they don't know what to do. We're exploring ways to use person-centered planning to help really discover and support the student differently. So hopefully, I've created a little optimistic discontent in terms of your experiences, whether you're an educator or a family member, and that you can kind of see things a little differently and see further about what's possible, and start where you are, use what you can, and do what you can. We do have training available on the Boggs Center website. I don't think I have it on here, but so if you just Google the Boggs Center and go to our training, BOGGS, go to our training tab and look for person-centered approaches in schools in transition. So,
and Michael, that's something that I will find that area on your website, and
yeah.
I will actually send it out to everyone who attended today's session.
Great, great, and I'll have I'll give you a couple of other PDFs that actually have current training that's available, and also our community of practice flyer, and a couple other things that I'll share with you all.
Perfect. So we have actually a few people asking for today's PowerPoint and also for any of the resource materials that you could provide on how to implement this process. So can you share a little bit?
Yeah. Well, what I can do is this, that I can share, if you want to email me at michael.steinberg@rutgers.edu if there's information that you want. I'm not going to share this entire PowerPoint, but this PowerPoint is part of the training that I do, so I'm going to give you training information. So a lot of the things that I kind of showed you and kind of went over a little bit, I go into detail in our one-day workshop around person-centered approaches in schools in transition, and that's real. And I really would prefer that that's the place that you get that information, because we want to make sure that whatever is happening, we're at a critical time, I think, in education and person-centered approaches. We really want the things that are happening out there to be done in a way that's well supported. So I really want to bring people into this community of practice and make sure you have the support and access to training and resources that you need for it to be successful. Because I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of, just like in adult services that I've spent many years working in, it's very easy for everyone and every organization to say they're person-centered, but a lot of times what you'll find is a not necessarily something that does any harm, but a fairly superficial approach to what people call person-centeredness. So a laundry list of likes and interests really is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something much deeper and much more impactful, in my view, that really serves to drive supports and services and changes the culture of organizations.
And again, I would just to sort of reiterate what Michael had shared. I actually attended Michael's one-day presentation, and I was so impressed with the information being shared there that's why I asked Michael to do this information webinar today. I would strongly encourage you all to look into those information sessions, register for one. They're held throughout the state, is that correct?
Yeah, they're held statewide, and if you're a family member and you see one is full that you really want to get into, just email me, and I'll work it out, because I like to get as many family members in the room with educators as possible.
And can you cover the cost?
It's free.
It's free.
Yeah, it
wanted
is.
You to say
Yep.
that.
It is free. The one thing, though, that I want to look at is that the sessions that we have are during the day, weekdays 9 to 3. I'd like, if I can figure out a way to, I'm happy to work anytime, weekends or nights, to do training, but I just got to make sure I can get a room full of people. So that's something, that I'm working with some organizations that support families to do. So but if you can make the ones that are available now, please, you're more than welcome. But I'll try and make some other ones at different times available as well.
Michael, I just want to get to a couple of questions before we do our goodbyes. If you have
sure, I'm not going anywhere.
Perfect. So how much training is needed to facilitate a person-centered meeting to support a transition plan?
So, it's a relative question. I'll be honest with you. When you come, I'll spend, a day with people training them on a process, right? But I really want people to become a part of a community of practice, because it's not easy to walk out of there after a day, and that's the nature of training. And really, that's why the project, where the long-term technical assistance that I do with schools allows me to be there over the course of a couple of years, to actually be the person who's facilitating plans and demonstrating that, and then I could co-facilitate with people, and I can observe them, give them feedback. That's very different from somebody coming for a day, but the idea is that you can take this process and you can try it, and I am available to talk to or email, or for people to be part of our community of practice and to talk to other schools. So it's just a question of the level of support I can provide. But I don't want to give people a day of training and then just leave them hanging, because you're going to come out of that, and some things are going to go well, some things not quite as well, and the facilitation skills involved are nuanced, and the only way to get better at it is to keep doing it.
So I think this is a great question. Is this process realistic for people who have serious mental illness, such as anxiety or bipolar?
It's funny you should ask. The person-centered approaches absolutely and are not only are appropriate and helpful. I can tell you that I have a family member that I've been supporting. I've been really the only support and the primary support for a long time, who has quite a number of mental health issues, including bipolar disorder, anxiety, panic, post-traumatic stress disorder, and in and out of mental health systems, and inpatient. And and when you have somebody going in and out of psychiatric emergency rooms, having a 1-page or 2-page person-centered description of who they are can make a world of difference in terms of what happens during that stay, and it has made a world of difference. So I'm not saying it's a magic bullet, but if a person is breathing, it's applicable.
Great. So I know in one of your slides, Michael, you had referenced, we're looking at someone's interests and their strengths and capacities. But you also mentioned that we have to identify people's barriers sometimes also to overcome those. So this question is, in person-centered planning, do we also need to address the individual's deficits and how to work on those as adults?
Absolutely. So the thing is this, it's a question of how you do that. Too often, and I've been a part of planning meetings and a person who's written plans for many, many years in my professional experience, but walking into a room and talking about deficits, immediately, and that being the context for the meeting, is not going to be terribly productive, in my opinion. What we do in person-centered approaches is a holistic, collaborative, planning event, group planning, which for almost all people is appropriate method for planning. There are outliers to that where someone who really isn't going to be productive. There's also, certain topics that aren't appropriate for a group setting. That said, we do talk about issues and barriers, but we talk about them in the context of who the person is, the great things about them, their vision for the future. It's all about what's in the way of you getting to where you want to be, and we tend not to be very good at that. If in systems, like we said at the very beginning, if it's a deficit-based model where we're really just kind of assessing people for those deficits and creating a treatment plan to fix them, that's the other end of the spectrum from what I'm talking about. So, as I said, it's about it's not about a magic bullet, but it's about you have to recognize a person's gifts. You have to address what's important for someone in the context of what's important to them, because nobody does anything that somebody else is telling them is important for them unless they can make some kind of connection in their mind of what's important to them. It's just not going to happen unless we are, manipulating them in some way we don't want to be, or controlling them in some way we don't want to be.
Perfect. So on behalf of the Family Support Center of New Jersey, myself, Melanie McGackin, along with Michael Steinbrook and the Boggs Center, we want to thank you for joining us today. Again, we encourage you to explore our website for any upcoming sessions. You have Michael's email address on your screen right now and his phone number. I would strongly suggest that you take that information down, follow up with Michael if you have any specific questions. We actually have a ton of questions that we did not respond to today. I will make sure to get those questions to Michael so we can provide some follow-up information to everyone who requested it. And if you need to contact me to access the archived webinar, please feel free to do so at the Family Support Center at 732-528-8080. And Michael?
And so with regard to some of those questions, I'm not sure what they are, but I'm definitely very happy to answer them. One thing I will say is that, when I do have a workshop or a training or a webinar like this, especially for family members, is most family members are interested in figuring out, how can I have this happen for my son or daughter? And the hard thing about that is that, we're at a point, in this kind of effort that, you may not be able to immediately, but the reason that a webinar like this is so important is that there are things you can do yourself. There are things that we need all families to do to advocate for really adopting person-centered approaches in schools and really speaking up and saying, yeah, this makes sense to us. This is something we value. This is something you may suggest to the child study team or your director of special services at schools where you are, to say, we want you, to kind of have the capacity to do this, and then that can create some positive pressure, on the system to create more support to make this happen in schools. Because, like I said, I'm kind of a one-man show at this point, but it's my life's work and passion. So I definitely want to be there as much as I can for folks.
So again, on behalf of myself and Michael, we thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to having you join us again in the future. Good day, everyone.